In the winter of 1895, a single insurance investigator from New York discovered something that would shake the very foundations of American commerce. Hidden within the ledgers of Pennsylvania's most trusted insurance company lay evidence of the most elaborate mass murder scheme in our nation's history. Over 36 years, the Eternal Life Insurance Company had systematically orchestrated the deaths of more than 2,000 men, women, and children, all for profit. The Blackstone family, pillars of their community and devout churchgoers, had turned murder into an art form and insurance fraud into an empire built on blood. What investigator Thomas Henley uncovered in those frozen Pennsylvania hills wasn't just financial corruption. It was a methodical genocide disguised as business, where human lives were nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet. Before we continue with the story of the Blackstone family and their deadly empire, I need to ask you something. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to face the darkest corners of American history. If you're ready to uncover secrets that powerful people tried to bury forever, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? I have a feeling this story will hit closer to home than you might expect. The truth about what happened in those Pennsylvania valleys between 1859 and 1895 was so disturbing that even today, certain records remain sealed in basement archives, marked with warnings that few dare to ignore. The year was 1859, and the rolling hills of south-central Pennsylvania were experiencing unprecedented growth. The discovery of coal deposits and the expansion of the Pennsylvania Railroad had transformed quiet farming communities into bustling industrial centers almost overnight. Mill Creek Township, nestled between the Susquehanna River and the Appalachian foothills, found itself at the heart of this transformation. It was into this landscape of opportunity that Mordecai Blackstone arrived with his two younger brothers, Isaiah and Jebediah. The Blackstones claimed to hail from Connecticut, though their accents carried hints of something more exotic, perhaps European, though no one could place it exactly. What mattered to the good people of Mill Creek Township wasn't where the Blackstones came from, but what they brought with them: capital, ambition, and an almost supernatural understanding of human nature. Mordecai, the eldest at 42, possessed the kind of commanding presence that made men listen and women blush. His steel-gray eyes seemed to peer directly into a person's soul, reading their deepest fears and desires with unsettling accuracy. Isaiah, 38, was the numbers man, thin as a rail with fingers that danced across ledger books like a pianist's across keys. The youngest, Jebediah, barely 35, served as the family's public face, blessed with the kind of warm smile and firm handshake that could sell ice to Eskimos. The brothers quickly established themselves in Mill Creek Township's social hierarchy. They purchased the largest house on Elm Street, an imposing three-story Victorian that had belonged to the late Judge Morrison, and immediately set about hosting elaborate dinner parties for the town's elite. Mordecai joined the Rotary Club, Isaiah became treasurer of the Merchants Association, and Jebediah taught Sunday school at First Presbyterian Church. But it was their business venture that truly captured the community's attention and trust. The Eternal Life Insurance Company opened its doors on October 15, 1859, in a modest storefront on Main Street. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Pennsylvania's industrial boom had created a new class of working families with steady incomes but dangerous jobs. Coal mining, steel production, and railroad construction offered good wages, but they also offered good ways to die young, leaving widows and orphans with nothing but grief and empty pantries. The Blackstones understood this fear intimately, and they crafted their sales pitch with surgical precision. Life insurance, they explained, wasn't just a financial product, it was a moral obligation. A man who failed to provide for his family's future was no better than a man who abandoned them while he lived. For just $2 a month, less than most men spent on tobacco, a worker could guarantee his family would never face poverty, no matter what dangerous fate might befall him. The policies were generous beyond belief. A standard worker earning $15 a week could purchase coverage worth $2,000, more than 6 years of wages. Even more remarkably, the Blackstones offered immediate coverage with no waiting periods and minimal medical examinations. Other insurance companies required invasive physical examinations and extensive paperwork, but Eternal Life Insurance made the process almost embarrassingly simple. Trust, Mordecai would say during his speeches at the Merchants Association, is the foundation of all commerce. We trust our neighbors to be honest about their health and circumstances, and they trust us to honor our commitments when tragedy strikes. The community embraced this philosophy wholeheartedly. By Christmas of 1859, Eternal Life Insurance had enrolled over 300 families in Mill Creek Township alone. By the following summer, agents working on commission were selling policies throughout Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. The Blackstone's success seemed to validate everything Americans believed about opportunity and hard work. They had arrived as strangers, and through innovation and dedication, built a thriving business that served their community's genuine needs. Local newspapers featured glowing profiles of the brothers, praising their business acumen and civic participation. What no one noticed were the small details that, in hindsight, should have raised alarm bells. Why did the Blackstones pay claims so quickly, often delivering cash payments to grieving families within days of a death, when other insurance companies required weeks or months of investigation? Why did their agents spend so much time at local saloons, buying drinks for miners and railroad workers, asking detailed questions about work schedules and safety protocols? Why did Jebediah always seem to know about industrial accidents before the news reached the local papers? Most puzzling of all, why did the Blackstones maintain such detailed files on their policyholders' daily routines, work schedules, family relationships, and financial difficulties? Isaiah's office contained filing cabinets filled with information that seemed to go far beyond what any insurance company would need. But these questions wouldn't be asked for many years. In 1860, the Blackstones were simply the most successful businessmen in Mill Creek Township, pillars of the community who had solved one of working-class America's greatest problems: the fear of leaving one's family destitute. The first death occurred on a bitter February morning in 1861, just as the nation was tearing itself apart over slavery and states' rights. February 14th, 1861. Valentine's Day dawned gray and bitter in Mill Creek Township, with temperatures hovering near zero and a wind that cut through wool coats like a blade. The Susquehanna Iron Works had been operating at full capacity for months, fulfilling government contracts as the nation braced for war. Heinrich Müller had been working the night shift in the foundry, tending the massive furnaces that turned raw ore into the steel that would soon make cannons and railroad tracks. At 34, Heinrich was one of the foundry's most experienced workers. A German immigrant who had learned his trade in the industrial mills of Pittsburgh before settling in Mill Creek Township with his wife, Anna, and their 3 young children. Heinrich had been one of Eternal Life Insurance's first customers. Convinced by Jebediah Blackstone's passionate Sunday school lesson about a man's duty to provide for his family's future. The $2,000 policy had seemed like a fortune to Heinrich, who earned barely $12 a week. Anna had cried with relief when Heinrich showed her the policy documents, knowing that no matter what happened, their children would never face the grinding poverty she had known as a child in Bavaria. What happened in the early hours of February 14th would be recorded in the county coroner's report as a tragic industrial accident. According to witnesses, Heinrich was adjusting the mechanism that controlled the flow of molten iron from the main furnace to the casting molds. The lever system had been giving the workers trouble for weeks, sometimes sticking, sometimes releasing too quickly. But the foundry's owner, Samuel Hartwell, had insisted they could wait until spring for expensive repairs. At approximately 2:47 a.m., something went catastrophically wrong. Thomas O'Brien, working the adjacent station, later told investigators that he heard Heinrich curse in German, followed by the sound of metal grinding against metal. When Thomas looked up, He saw Heinrich struggling with the main release lever, which appeared to be stuck in the closed position. The furnace pressure was building to dangerous levels. They could all hear the ominous groaning of the containment chamber. Heinrich was trying to release the pressure manually, Thomas told the coroner. He was pulling on that lever with all his strength, and I could see the sweat on his face, even in that cold foundry. Then suddenly, the whole mechanism gave way at once. What followed was a nightmare of superheated metal and human agony. The release mechanism didn't just open, it shattered completely, sending a torrent of molten iron cascading across the foundry floor. Heinrich, caught directly in the path of the flow, was killed instantly. The molten metal didn't just claim one life, however. The cascade ignited a stack of lumber stored near the furnace, and the resulting fire claimed 2 more workers who were trapped when a support beam collapsed. 3 men dead, 3 eternal life insurance policies, 3 families that would receive immediate payment from the Blackstone brothers. But the details that emerged in the following days painted a picture that was both tragic and oddly convenient. First, there was the matter of the faulty lever mechanism. Samuel Hartwell swore that his maintenance foreman, Jacob Walsh, had declared the system safe just 3 days earlier. However, when investigators tried to interview Walsh, they discovered he had left town abruptly on February 12th, claiming a family emergency in Philadelphia. Walsh was never seen in Mill Creek Township again, and letters sent to the Philadelphia address he had provided were returned as undeliverable. Second, there was the curious timing of the accident. The night shift normally had 6 workers, but on February 14th, only 4 men were present. 2 had called in sick with influenza, though both were seen in perfect health at McGinty's Tavern later that same evening, buying drinks and celebrating their good fortune at avoiding what they called a close call. Third, there was the matter of the lumber storage. Foundry workers insisted that flammable materials were never stored near the furnaces. It was the most basic safety rule in their dangerous profession. Yet on the night of February 14th, a full cord of seasoned oak had been stacked precisely where the molten iron would flow if the release mechanism failed catastrophically. Most puzzling of all was the response of the Blackstone brothers themselves. While the bodies were still being pulled from the wreckage, Jebediah Blackstone appeared at the foundry, claiming he had heard the explosion from his home 3 miles away. He immediately took charge of notifying the victims' families, personally escorting Anna Muller, Margaret O'Brien, and Sarah Thompson to identify their husbands' remains. By the time the sun set on February 14th, all 3 widows had been visited by Isaiah Blackstone, who presented them with immediate cash settlements of their full policy amounts. "It's what Heinrich would have wanted," Isaiah told Anna Miller as he pressed $2,000 in gold coins into her trembling hands. "A quick settlement, so you and the children won't suffer any additional hardship during your time of grief." The community was impressed by the Blackstones' compassion and efficiency. Other insurance companies might drag out claims for months, demanding investigations and second opinions, but Eternal Life Insurance treated their policyholders like family. The rapid settlements were seen as evidence of the brothers' Christian values and business integrity. Only one person seemed troubled by the suspicious circumstances surrounding the foundry fire. Dr. Elias Crawford, Mill Creek Township's physician and county coroner, had examined hundreds of industrial accident victims during his 20-year career. He understood the physics of molten metal, the patterns of burn injuries, and the way machinery failed under stress. What he saw in the foundry wreckage didn't match his experience. The lever mechanism, Dr. Crawford noted in his private journal, had failed in a very specific way. The metal showed signs of deliberate weakening, file marks and chemical etching that suggested someone had systematically compromised the component's structural integrity. The lumber storage was equally suspicious, stacked in a pattern that would create maximum fire spread if ignited. Most troubling were the bodies themselves. Heinrich Müller's injuries were consistent with direct exposure to molten iron, but the other 2 victims showed signs of smoke inhalation that preceded the burn damage. They had been breathing toxic fumes before the fire reached them. suggesting they had been unconscious or incapacitated when the flames arrived. Dr. Crawford documented his concerns meticulously, but when he attempted to present his findings to the county sheriff, he discovered that the official investigation had already been closed. The case had been classified as an industrial accident caused by equipment failure and worker negligence. No further investigation would be conducted. The speed and finality of that decision struck Dr. Crawford as highly unusual, but he was a medical man, not a detective. He filed his concerns in his personal records and turned his attention to the living. What Dr. Crawford didn't know was that Sheriff Marcus Dougherty had received a personal visit from Mordecai Blackstone on the morning of February 15th. The conversation, which took place in the sheriff's private office with the door locked and the curtains drawn, lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, Sheriff Dougherty had a wallet containing $500 in cash, and Mordecai Blackstone had assurance that the foundry fire would be forgotten as quickly as possible. It was a transaction that would be repeated many times over the following decades, though the amounts would grow considerably larger as the Blackstone family's operations expanded and their appetite for profit became insatiable. The three widows from the foundry fire used their insurance money to relocate to distant cities, seeking fresh starts away from the painful memories of Mill Creek Township. Anna Mueller moved to Philadelphia with her children, Margaret O'Brien took her family to Pittsburgh, and Sarah Thompson returned to her relatives in Ohio. None of them would live to see Christmas. The deaths of the three foundry widows would have raised immediate suspicions if they had occurred in Mill Creek Township, but scattered across 3 different states, they appeared to be nothing more than cruel coincidences in lives already marked by tragedy. Anna Mueller was found dead in her Philadelphia boarding house on September 3, 1861. The landlord discovered her body after other tenants complained about a terrible smell emanating from her room. The city coroner determined that Anna had died from accidental poisoning, apparently consuming a bottle of patent medicine that contained lethal amounts of mercury. Her 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 11, were found in their beds, victims of what appeared to be the same tragic mistake. Margaret O'Brien's death in Pittsburgh was attributed to a gas leak in the modest house she had purchased with her husband's insurance money. She and her 2 young sons were discovered by neighbors after failing to appear at Sunday services. The Pittsburgh police report noted that the gas valve in the kitchen had been left open, apparently by accident, filling the house with deadly fumes while the family slept. Sarah Thompson lasted longest, surviving until November before succumbing to what Cleveland physicians diagnosed as consumption, tuberculosis that had apparently progressed with unusual speed and virulence. Her 4 children died within days of their mother, victims of the same disease. 13 people dead. 13 lives that had been protected by eternal life insurance policies, then extinguished within months of receiving their settlements. But separated by hundreds of miles and different jurisdictions, the pattern remained invisible to authorities who had no reason to connect tragic accidents in Pennsylvania with gas leaks in Pittsburgh or disease outbreaks in Cleveland. The Blackstone brothers, meanwhile, continued to build their empire with methodical precision. By the end of 1861, Eternal Life Insurance had expanded into Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and Virginia. They employed more than 50 agents across 5 states, each trained in the Blackstone method of identifying and recruiting ideal customers. The ideal customer, according to the manual Isaiah had written for new agents, was a working man between the ages of 25 and 45, with a dangerous job, a loving family, and no significant debts or connections to powerful people who might ask uncomfortable questions if he died unexpectedly. Coal miners were perfect. Railroad workers were excellent. Factory hands, foundry workers, and construction laborers all fit the profile. Farmers, shopkeepers, and professionals were generally avoided unless they possessed some other attractive quality, perhaps a gambling habit or drinking problem that might explain an untimely demise. The agent training manual, which would later be discovered in Isaiah's personal safe, contained detailed instructions on how to gather intelligence about potential policyholders. Agents were taught to frequent saloons, barbershops, and boarding houses, engaging in casual conversations that would reveal crucial information about work schedules, family relationships, debts, and personal habits. A successful agent, the manual instructed, knows his customers better than they know themselves. He understands their weaknesses, their fears, their routines, and their connections to the community. Knowledge is the foundation of all successful insurance underwriting. The manual also contained more disturbing sections that detailed how to identify potential complications, people who might ask difficult questions if a policyholder died unexpectedly. These complications included physicians, lawyers, journalists, law enforcement officers, and prominent citizens who might have the influence to demand thorough investigations. For each potential complication, the manual provided specific strategies for neutralization. Some could be bribed, others could be intimidated. A few might require more permanent solutions. By 1863, the Blackstone operation had evolved far beyond simple insurance fraud. They had created a vast network of corrupted officials, hired killers, and cooperative witnesses that stretched across multiple states. Sheriff Dougherty in Pennsylvania had been joined by police chiefs in Ohio, coroners in West Virginia, and judges in Maryland, all of whom had discovered that cooperation with the Blackstone family was far more profitable than honest law enforcement. The actual murders were carried out by a carefully selected team of specialists, each with particular expertise in creating accidents that would fool cursory investigations. There was Patrick, the Torch, McGillicuddy, an Irish immigrant who could make any building burn in a way that appeared accidental. Samuel Doc Henderson understood poisons and chemicals with the precision of a trained pharmacist. Marcus, the engineer Kowalski, could sabotage industrial equipment so skillfully that the resulting failures seemed like natural wear and tear. These men worked for substantial fees, typically between $100 and $500 per assignment, but they were paid from a fund that generated thousands of dollars in profit from each successful claim. The economics were brutally simple. For every dollar spent on murder, the Blackstone brothers earned at least $4 in insurance payouts. More importantly, the systematic elimination of widows and surviving family members meant that their crimes generated no living witnesses. Dead men could not testify about suspicious conversations with insurance agents. Dead widows could not hire lawyers to investigate unusual circumstances surrounding their husbands' deaths. Dead children could not grow up harboring suspicions about the family tragedies that had claimed their parents. It was a perfect system, refined through years of experience and protected by a wall of corruption that seemed impenetrable. The only problem was scale. By 1865, Eternal Life Insurance was processing more than 200 death claims per year across 6 states. Even allowing for the genuine accidents and natural deaths that occurred among their policyholders, the mortality rate of Eternal Life customers was nearly 3 times higher than the industry average. Statistical analysis, however, was a relatively new field in the 1860s, and most insurance companies relied on crude actuarial tables that couldn't detect sophisticated patterns of fraud. The few mathematically trained professionals who might have noticed the anomalies were either working for the Blackstone brothers or had been persuaded to focus their attention elsewhere. Dr. Elias Crawford, still serving as Mill Creek Township's coroner, had begun to suspect that something was terribly wrong with Eternal Life Insurance. His position gave him access to death records from multiple counties, and he had started maintaining his own private database of suspicious deaths involving Eternal Life policyholders. By 1867, Dr. Crawford's files contained evidence of 47 deaths that exhibited unusual circumstances. Industrial accidents involving recently serviced equipment, house fires in buildings with newly installed gas lines, disease outbreaks that struck only insured families, and transportation accidents that seemed to target specific passengers. The pattern was becoming undeniable, but Dr. Crawford faced a crucial problem. He had no authority to investigate crimes across state lines, and every local official he approached with his concerns had either dismissed his theories as coincidence or actively discouraged his research. Sheriff Dougherty had become particularly hostile to Dr. Crawford's inquiries, warning him that spreading unfounded accusations about respected businessmen could result in serious legal consequences. The threats were delivered with a friendly smile, but Dr. Crawford understood the underlying message perfectly. Still, the physician continued his documentation, driven by a sense of professional duty and personal outrage. Each suspicious death represented a family destroyed, children orphaned, and a community's trust violated. Someone, somewhere, needed to document the truth, even if justice seemed impossible. What Dr. Crawford didn't realize was that his activities had not gone unnoticed by the Blackstone brothers. Isaiah, whose network of informants included clerks, secretaries, and office workers throughout the region, had learned about Dr. Crawford's private investigation by early 1868. The doctor's persistent questions and detailed record-keeping represented exactly the kind of complication that the Blackstone manual warned against. On March 15, 1868, Dr. Crawford failed to return home from his evening rounds. His horse was found the next morning, standing calmly beside Willow Creek, 2 miles east of town. Dr. Crawford's medical bag was in the saddle, but there was no sign of the doctor himself. The official search lasted 3 days and involved more than 100 volunteers from Mill Creek Township and surrounding areas. Sheriff Dougherty personally led the effort, expressing deep concern for the welfare of such a respected member of the community. Dr. Crawford's body was discovered on the 4th day, floating in a deep pool nearly 6 miles downstream from where his horse had been found. The county coroner, Dr. Crawford's own assistant, Dr. James Morrison, determined that the physician had apparently suffered a heart attack while crossing the creek, fallen from his horse, and drowned in the swift current. It was a plausible explanation for a man in his 60s who worked long hours under considerable stress. The only suspicious element was the absence of Dr. Crawford's private files, which had apparently been removed from his office sometime between his disappearance and the discovery of his body. Dr. Morrison, when questioned about the missing documents, explained that he had taken the liberty of disposing of Dr. Crawford's personal papers to spare the family any embarrassment. Some of the files, he explained, contained unfounded theories and accusations that might damage reputations if they became public. Dr. Morrison, a young man fresh from medical school in Philadelphia, had been recruited by Isaiah Blackstone personally, and was earning a substantial supplemental income for his cooperation with Eternal Life Insurance. His willingness to cover up evidence and falsify official reports would prove invaluable to the Blackstone operation over the coming decades. With Dr. Crawford eliminated and his evidence destroyed, the Blackstone brothers felt secure enough to expand their operations into new territories and more ambitious schemes. But they had underestimated both the scope of their activities and the persistence of those who would eventually bring them to justice. The year 1870 marked a turning point in the Blackstone operation, though it would be decades before anyone understood the significance of the changes that began to unfold in that pivotal year. The catalyst was an unexpected opportunity that arose from America's continued industrial expansion and the massive immigration waves that followed the Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of European immigrants were pouring into Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, seeking work in the coal mines, steel mills, and railroad construction projects that were transforming the American landscape. These immigrants represented the ideal customer base for Eternal Life Insurance, men with dangerous jobs, limited English, few social connections, and desperate needs to provide security for their families. More importantly, they came from countries where official records were spotty or non-existent, making it almost impossible for American authorities to verify their backgrounds or track their relatives. Mordecai Blackstone recognized the potential immediately. During a family meeting in the spring of 1870, he outlined a new phase of their operation that would dwarf everything they had accomplished previously. "Gentlemen," he told his brothers in the privacy of their Elm Street mansion, "we have been thinking too small. We have been harvesting fruit from individual trees when we should be clearing entire orchards. The plan that emerged from that meeting was breathtaking in its ambition and horrifying in its implications. Instead of targeting individual policyholders for elimination, the Blackstone brothers would begin orchestrating mass casualty events that could kill dozens of insured workers simultaneously. Industrial disasters, transportation accidents, and building collapses could generate enormous insurance payouts while appearing to be tragic but explicable accidents. The key was careful planning and precise execution. They would need to identify locations where large numbers of their policyholders worked or gathered, then engineer disasters that would appear completely natural while maximizing casualties among insured individuals. Their first target was the Morgantown coal mine in West Virginia, where more than 60 eternal life policyholders were employed in various capacities. The mine was owned by Harrison Industries, a company that had been cutting costs aggressively to maximize profits during the post-war economic boom. Marcus the engineer Kowalski spent 3 months studying the Morgantown operation, posing as a safety inspector and equipment maintenance specialist. His analysis revealed that the mine's ventilation system was woefully inadequate and that dangerous levels of methane gas were accumulating in several deep shafts. On October 12, 1870, an explosion ripped through the Morgantown mine at 2:17 p.m. during the peak of the afternoon shift. The blast, attributed to methane ignition caused by a spark from mining equipment, killed 47 workers instantly and trapped another dozen in collapsed tunnels. Only 8 men survived, and 3 of those died from their injuries within days. 56 men dead, 38 eternal life insurance policies, more than $76,000 in claim payments. The investigation into the Morgantown disaster was handled by state officials who had no reason to suspect anything beyond criminal negligence by Harrison Industries. The company was fined heavily and faced numerous civil lawsuits, but the explosion itself was classified as an industrial accident caused by inadequate safety measures and poor ventilation design. What investigators didn't discover was that Marcus Kowalski had made subtle modifications to the mine's ventilation system 3 weeks before the explosion, changes that ensured methane would accumulate to explosive levels in precisely the areas where the largest concentrations of eternal life policyholders were working. The success of the Morgantown operation convinced the Blackstone brothers that mass casualty events were the future of their enterprise. Over the following 5 years, they orchestrated 8 major disasters across 4 states, claiming more than 300 lives and generating insurance payouts exceeding $400,000. There was the collapse of the Riverside Bridge outside Pittsburgh in 1872, which killed 23 workers during construction, 19 of whom carried eternal life policies. The official investigation blamed faulty design and substandard materials, never discovering that key support beams had been deliberately weakened with acid compounds. The Great Fire of Cumberland, Maryland, in 1874 consumed 6 city blocks and claimed 41 lives, including 32 eternal life policyholders who had been attending a company-sponsored social event at the Merchants Hall. Patrick the Torch McGillicuddy had spent weeks preparing for that fire, strategically placing accelerants and blocking fire exits to ensure maximum casualties among the target population. The sinking of the steamboat Catherine Ann on the Ohio River in 1875 was perhaps their most audacious operation. The boat, carrying immigrant workers to coal mines in southern Ohio, went down in calm weather with the loss of 67 passengers and crew. 43 of the victims carried eternal life policies that had been sold to them just days before their departure by agents working the immigrant docks in Pittsburgh. Each disaster was investigated by local authorities who lacked the resources, expertise, or motivation to detect sophisticated sabotage. The Blackstone brothers had become masters at exploiting the jurisdictional limitations and communication failures of 19th-century law enforcement. More importantly, they had developed an increasingly sophisticated network of corruption that extended far beyond small-town sheriffs and country coroners. State legislators, federal judges, railroad executives, mine owners, and shipping company officials had all been recruited or compromised, creating a web of protection that seemed impenetrable. By 1875, the Eternal Life Insurance Company was one of the largest insurance providers in the eastern United States, with more than 15,000 active policies and annual revenues exceeding $2 million. The Blackstone brothers had become wealthy and respected members of society, known for their charitable contributions and civic involvement. Mordecai served on the boards of 3 banks and had been appointed to a state commission studying industrial safety regulations. Isaiah was treasurer of the American Insurance Association and a frequent speaker at business conferences. Jebediah had been elected to the Pennsylvania state legislature and was being mentioned as a potential candidate for Congress. Their success seemed to validate everything America believed about free enterprise and individual achievement. They were living proof that immigrants and outsiders could achieve extraordinary success through hard work, innovation, and dedication to serving their customers' needs. But success on such a massive scale inevitably attracted attention from people with the skills and resources to recognize patterns that local authorities had missed. Thomas Henley had spent 15 years investigating insurance fraud for Lloyd's of London before accepting a position with the New York Insurance Commission in 1873. His job was to analyze industry statistics and identify companies that posed regulatory risks to the rapidly expanding American insurance market. Henley was a meticulous researcher with advanced training in mathematics and statistics, rare qualifications in an era when most insurance investigations relied on intuition and basic record-keeping. His analytical methods had exposed several major fraud schemes in New York and Massachusetts, saving insurance companies hundreds of thousands of dollars and sending dozens of criminals to prison. In late 1875, Henley began noticing statistical anomalies in the mortality data reported by companies operating across multiple states. Most insurance companies showed mortality rates that varied predictably based on their customer demographics and geographic coverage areas. Companies that insured primarily urban professionals had low death rates, while those serving industrial workers experienced higher claims but within expected parameters. Eternal Life Insurance was different. Their mortality rates were not only higher than industry averages, but they fluctuated in ways that seemed to correlate with specific dates and locations rather than seasonal patterns or demographic trends. More puzzling, their death claims clustered around major industrial accidents and transportation disasters at statistically impossible rates. Henley spent months analyzing the data, cross-referencing newspaper reports of major accidents with Eternal Life's claim payments. What he discovered was so disturbing that he initially questioned his own calculations. Of the 8 major industrial disasters that had occurred in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland between 1870 and 1875, Eternal Life policyholders accounted for an average of 68% of the fatalities, despite representing less than 15% of the workforce in those regions. The probability of such consistent overrepresentation occurring by chance was less than 1 in 50,000. But statistical correlation, however compelling, was not legal evidence. Henley needed proof of deliberate wrongdoing, and that would require investigating the Blackstone brothers directly. What Thomas Henley didn't realize was that his inquiries had already been detected by Isaiah's network of informants within the insurance industry. By the time Henley began his investigation in earnest, the Blackstone brothers were already planning to eliminate this new threat to their empire. The winter of 1876 would bring the most dangerous challenge the Blackstone family had ever faced, and their response would reveal the true depths of their criminal organization. Thomas Henley was not a man easily intimidated. During his years investigating fraud for Lloyd's of London, he had faced threats from some of Europe's most dangerous criminals, survived an assassination attempt in Naples, and watched corrupt officials try to destroy his career when his investigations threatened powerful interests. But as he delved deeper into the activities of Eternal Life Insurance, Henley began to realize he was confronting something far more sophisticated and deadly than anything he had encountered before. The breakthrough came in February 1876, when Henley discovered a connection that had been hidden in plain sight. While reviewing shipping manifests from the Catherine Ann disaster, Henley noticed that 43 of the 67 passengers had purchased their insurance policies from the same agent, a man named Sean Murphy, who worked the immigrant docks in Pittsburgh. Murphy, according to his employment records, had been working for Eternal Life for less than 3 months, but had already sold more than 200 policies to recent immigrants. Henley traveled to Pittsburgh to interview Murphy, only to discover that the man had disappeared 2 weeks after the Catherine Ann sinking, abandoning his boarding house room and leaving no forwarding address. The landlord mentioned that Murphy had left suddenly after receiving a visit from well-dressed gentlemen in an expensive carriage. More interesting was what Murphy had left behind: a trunk containing detailed records of his sales activities, including personal information about his customers that went far beyond standard insurance applications. Murphy had documented their work schedules, travel plans, family relationships, and financial circumstances with the thoroughness of a police investigator. Hidden in the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in oiled cloth, Henley found something even more significant: correspondence between Murphy and his supervisors at Eternal Life, including coded telegrams that seemed to discuss special arrangements and elimination schedules. One telegram, dated just 3 days before the Catherine Ann disaster, was particularly damning. Harvest ready. 43 packages confirmed for river route. Proceed with orchard plan. Payment upon completion. Henley had worked enough fraud cases to recognize criminal code when he saw it. Packages clearly referred to policyholders, river route was the Ohio River Steamboat Service, and orchard plan was some kind of systematic killing scheme. But he needed more evidence, and he needed to understand the full scope of the Blackstone operation. Henley spent the next 6 months conducting the most thorough investigation of his career. He traveled to dozens of cities across 6 states, interviewing survivors of industrial accidents, family members of disaster victims, and officials who had investigated suspicious deaths. He examined coroner reports, police files, insurance claims, and newspaper accounts, building a comprehensive picture of 30 years of systematic murder. What emerged was a criminal enterprise of staggering proportions. The Blackstone brothers had not simply been killing individual policyholders, they had been engineering mass casualty events designed to maximize insurance payouts while maintaining plausible deniability. They had corrupted officials at every level of government, from small-town sheriffs to federal judges. They had created a network of professional killers, saboteurs, and false witnesses that operated across multiple states with military precision. Most horrifying of all, they had been eliminating entire families to prevent witnesses and reduce future complications. Henley's research suggested that more than 3,000 people had died as a direct result of Blackstone family activities, including hundreds of women and children who had posed no threat beyond their connection to insured workers. By August 1876, Henley had assembled enough evidence to support criminal charges against the Blackstone brothers that could send them to the gallows. But he also understood that his investigation had made him a marked man. The first warning came in the form of a fire that consumed his hotel room in Cleveland while he was interviewing witnesses to the Riverside Bridge collapse. Henley had been staying at the Imperial Hotel for 3 days, and the fire occurred on his final night, conveniently starting in his room while he was having dinner downstairs. The hotel manager apologized profusely, explaining that a gas lamp had apparently malfunctioned, but Henley noticed that only his room had been affected and that his investigative files had been thoroughly searched before the fire started. The second warning was more direct. A man approached Henley outside the Pittsburgh courthouse, where he had been examining records related to the Catherine Ann disaster. The stranger, well-dressed and soft-spoken, politely suggested that Henley might want to consider accepting a generous consulting position with a railroad company in California, a position that would require him to relocate immediately and indefinitely. "Mr. Henley," the man said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "some investigations can be very dangerous to one's health. Perhaps it would be wise to pursue opportunities in a more hospitable climate." Henley declined the offer. The third warning came in the form of a telegram delivered to his hotel in Wheeling, West Virginia. Your wife Margaret sends her regards from New York. She hopes you will conclude your business quickly and return home safely. Some neighborhoods can be very dangerous for ladies traveling alone. Henley's blood ran cold. Margaret was supposed to be visiting her sister in Boston, not traveling anywhere near New York. The message was clear. The Blackstone brothers knew where his wife was, and they were prepared to harm her if he continued his investigation. But Thomas Henley had not survived 15 years of investigating dangerous criminals by backing down when threatened. Instead of retreating, he accelerated his timeline and began preparing for the most dangerous phase of his investigation: direct confrontation with the Blackstone brothers themselves. Henley arranged to meet with federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C., presenting his evidence to Assistant Attorney General William Morrison in September 1876. Morrison, a veteran prosecutor who had handled complex fraud cases during the post-Civil War Reconstruction, was initially skeptical of Henley's claims. The scope of the alleged conspiracy seemed almost impossible to believe. "Mr. Henley," Morrison said after reviewing the files, "you're asking me to believe that 3 businessmen have orchestrated the murders of thousands of people across multiple states over a period of nearly 20 years, all while maintaining the appearance of respected citizens and successful entrepreneurs. Do you understand how extraordinary these allegations are?" "I understand perfectly, sir," Henley replied. "But I also understand that extraordinary crimes require extraordinary evidence, and that's exactly what I'm providing." Morrison spent 2 weeks reviewing Henley's documentation with a team of federal investigators. The evidence was compelling, but circumstantial. Statistical patterns, suspicious coincidences, and coded communications that suggested criminal activity, but would be difficult to prove in court. "We need more," Morrison concluded. "We need direct evidence of criminal planning, documentary proof of the conspiracy, or testimony from someone inside the organization. What you've assembled here is enough to justify an investigation, but not enough to secure convictions." Henley had anticipated this response. "Give me 2 more months," he said. "I believe I can get what we need." What Henley planned was the most dangerous gambit of his career. He would attempt to infiltrate the Blackstone organization by posing as a corrupt official seeking to join their network. Using forged credentials and a carefully constructed false identity, Henley approached Sheriff Dougherty in Mill Creek Township, claiming to be a federal court clerk who could provide advance warning of any government investigations into insurance fraud. He offered to sell information about pending federal cases in exchange for a substantial fee and potential partnership opportunities. Sheriff Dougherty, who had been taking Blackstone money for more than 15 years, was intrigued but cautious. He arranged a meeting between Henley and Isaiah Blackstone, who would determine whether this potential new recruit was genuine or dangerous. The meeting took place on October 23, 1876, in the back room of McGinty's Tavern in Mill Creek Township. Isaiah Blackstone arrived with 2 bodyguards, men whose hard faces and watchful eyes suggested they were more than simple employees. Henley had prepared meticulously for this encounter, studying every detail of federal court procedures and memorizing the names and backgrounds of dozens of officials who might plausibly be corrupted. He presented himself as Walter Henderson, a clerk in the federal courthouse in Philadelphia, who had access to sensitive information about upcoming investigations. Isaiah questioned him for more than an hour, probing his knowledge of court procedures, his motivations for betraying his oath of office, and his understanding of the risks involved in dealing with the Blackstone family. "Mr. Henderson," Isaiah finally said, "you seem to understand our business remarkably well for a court clerk. Tell me, what exactly do you think we do here in Mill Creek Township?" It was a test, and Henley knew that his answer would determine whether he lived or died in that tavern back room. "I think you found a way to turn tragedy into profit," Henley replied carefully. "I think you understand that sometimes unfortunate events create opportunities for those who are prepared to take advantage of them. And I think you've been very successful at ensuring that government officials focus their attention elsewhere when questions might be asked. Isaiah smiled for the first time during the meeting. That's a very diplomatic way of describing our operations, Mr. Henderson. But diplomacy is a luxury we can't always afford in our line of work. Sometimes we need people who can be more direct. I understand, Henley said, and I'm prepared to be as direct as necessary, provided the compensation is adequate. Isaiah studied him for a long moment, then nodded to one of his bodyguards. Marcus will escort you to a private location where we can discuss specific arrangements. I think you'll find our terms quite generous. Henley followed Marcus Kowalski, the same engineer who had sabotaged the Morgantown mine and the Riverside Bridge, to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, he discovered the true headquarters of the Blackstone criminal organization. The warehouse contained detailed maps of 6 states, marked with pins indicating the locations of major industrial facilities, transportation hubs, and population centers. Filing cabinets lined the walls, filled with dossiers on thousands of eternal life policyholders, including their work schedules, family relationships, and personal vulnerabilities. Most chilling of all was a large table covered with architectural drawings and engineering schematics, plans for soaring through bridge supports, chemical formulas for accelerants and poisons, and detailed layouts of coal mines showing optimal locations for explosive charges. "Welcome to the real Eternal Life Insurance Company," Isaiah said as he gestured around the warehouse. "This is where we plan the tragedies that make our business so profitable." Over the next hour, Isaiah provided Henley with a comprehensive overview of their operations. He explained how they identified target populations, planned mass casualty events, corrupted local officials, and eliminated potential witnesses. He detailed their network of professional killers, their methods for avoiding detection, and their strategies for expanding into new territories. It was everything Henley needed to destroy the Blackstone empire, but he still faced the crucial challenge of surviving long enough to deliver the information to federal authorities. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Mill Creek Township intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Isaiah's confession was interrupted by the arrival of Mordecai and Jebediah Blackstone, who had come to evaluate their potential new recruit personally. Mordecai, now 59 years old and bearing the commanding presence of a man accustomed to absolute authority, studied Henley with the intensity of a predator assessing prey. "My brother tells me you might be useful to our organization," Mordecai said. "But usefulness requires trust, and trust requires demonstration. We have a small project that needs attention, a test of your commitment to our shared interests." Mordecai handed Henley a photograph of a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician in Johnstown who has been asking inconvenient questions about some of our former policyholders. Dr. Webb seems to believe that certain industrial accidents in his area have been artificially induced. He's been corresponding with officials in Harrisburg, sharing his theories about patterns he's detected in local mortality statistics." Henley's blood ran cold as he realized what was being asked of him. "Dr. Webb has become a complication that requires resolution," Mordecai continued. "We need someone with federal connections to ensure that his concerns are dismissed by the appropriate authorities. Can we count on your cooperation in this matter?" "Of course," Henley managed to reply, though his mouth had gone dry. "What specifically do you need me to do?" "Dr. Webb is scheduled to testify before a state legislative committee next week," Jebediah interjected. "He believes he has evidence of systematic insurance fraud connected to industrial accidents in western Pennsylvania. We need that testimony to be discredited before it can damage our reputation." Mordecai leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes boring into Henley's. "More importantly, we need Dr. Webb to understand that pursuing this investigation would be extremely dangerous to his health and the well-being of his family. Sometimes a word from the right federal official can be very persuasive in encouraging people to reconsider their civic obligations. Henley realized he was being asked to participate in the intimidation or elimination of a man whose only crime was trying to expose the truth about the Blackstone murders. It was a test of his loyalty, but it was also an opportunity to gather even more evidence while potentially saving Dr. Webb's life. "I can handle this," Henley said, "but I'll need detailed information about Dr. Webb's evidence and testimony to determine the best approach for discrediting him." Isaiah produced a thick file containing copies of Dr. Webb's correspondence, his research notes, and transcripts of his preliminary interviews with state investigators. As Henley reviewed the documents, he realized that Dr. Webb had independently reached many of the same conclusions about the Blackstone operations, though his evidence was less comprehensive than Henley's own investigation. More importantly, Dr. Webb had scheduled his testimony for November 15, 1876, less than 3 weeks away. Dr. Webb must be neutralized before that hearing, Mordecai stated flatly. If his testimony becomes public, it could trigger federal investigations that would be very inconvenient for our business operations. Henley nodded, understanding that he had perhaps 2 weeks to complete his infiltration, gather the final evidence he needed, and escape with his life before the Blackstone brothers discovered his true identity. What he didn't realize was that his time was already running out. Isaiah Blackstone was a cautious man who trusted no one completely, and he had already begun investigating Walter Henderson's background. Within days, he would discover that no such person worked for the federal court system in Philadelphia, and that Thomas Henley had been asking questions about eternal life insurance in multiple cities across several states. The final confrontation between Henley and the Blackstone family was approaching, and only one side would survive the encounter. November 8, 1876. The autumn morning dawned gray and bitter in Mill Creek Township, with frost covering the windows of the houses along Elm Street and smoke rising from chimneys throughout the valley. Thomas Henley had spent a sleepless night in his hotel room, reviewing his evidence and preparing for what he knew would be the most dangerous day of his life. Isaiah Blackstone had sent word the previous evening that Walter Henderson was expected at the warehouse at 9 o'clock sharp for a final briefing on the Dr. Webb situation. The message had been delivered by Marcus Kowalski, whose cold smile and meaningful glances suggested that something had changed in the Blackstone brothers' assessment of their new recruit. Henley had used the overnight hours to prepare multiple copies of his evidence, sealing them in envelopes addressed to federal prosecutors, newspaper editors, and insurance commissioners across the eastern United States. If he didn't survive the morning, at least the truth about the Blackstone crimes would eventually reach people with the power to act on it. At 8:30, Henley made his way to the warehouse on the outskirts of town, carrying a leather satchel that contained both genuine federal court documents he had forged and a loaded Colt revolver he prayed he wouldn't need to use. The streets were mostly empty at that hour, with only a few workers heading to their jobs at the foundry and the railroad yard. The warehouse appeared deserted when Henley arrived, but he could see smoke rising from the chimney and lamplight flickering in the windows. As he approached the main entrance, Marcus Kowalski emerged from the shadows, accompanied by 2 other men Henley didn't recognize. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Kowalski said with mock politeness. "The Blackstone brothers are waiting for you inside. I think you'll find today's meeting very educational." The tone of voice and the positioning of the men told Henley everything he needed to know. His cover had been blown, and he was walking into a trap. But he had come too far to retreat now, and Dr. Webb's life might depend on what happened in the next few hours. Inside the warehouse, Henley found all 3 Blackstone brothers waiting for him around the large table that held their operational maps and planning documents. But the atmosphere was very different from his previous visit. Gone was the welcoming tone and collegial discussion. Instead, Mordecai, Isaiah, and Jebediah watched him with the cold calculation of men preparing to dispose of a problem. "Mr. Henderson," Mordecai said, not bothering to rise from his chair, Or should I say, Mr. Thomas Henley of the New York Insurance Commission. Henley's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon, but he forced himself to remain calm. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. Isaiah laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. Please, Mr. Henley. We've known about your investigation for weeks. Did you really think you could infiltrate our organization without us discovering your true identity? We have contacts in every major city from Boston to Chicago. Your reputation as an insurance investigator precedes you. Jebediah leaned forward, his political smile replaced by an expression of genuine malice. The question isn't whether you're Thomas Henley. The question is what we're going to do with you now that you've learned so much about our business operations. Henley realized that further deception was pointless. What I've learned is that you're murderers on a scale that defies comprehension. 3,000 people dead so you could collect insurance money. Entire families eliminated to cover your tracks. You're not businessmen, you're monsters. Mordecai's eyes flashed with anger, but his voice remained controlled. Monsters? We're entrepreneurs, Mr. Henley. We identified a market inefficiency and developed innovative solutions to exploit it. The insurance industry was built on the premise that most policyholders would pay premiums for years without ever filing claims. We simply found ways to ensure that our customers' premiums generated immediate returns. By murdering them, Henley said flatly. By accelerating natural economic processes, Isaiah corrected. Industrial workers die in accidents every day. Immigrants succumb to disease and misfortune constantly. We merely provided focus and efficiency to inevitable outcomes. Jebediah stood and walked to one of the filing cabinets, withdrawing a thick folder. The beautiful thing about our system, Mr. Henley, is its scalability. We've proven that mass casualty events can be engineered with minimal risk of detection. Coal mine explosions, bridge collapses, steamboat accidents, all tragic but explicable within the normal parameters of industrial life. What's your point? Henley asked, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. Mordecai smiled for the first time since Henley's arrival. Our point, Mr. Henley, is that we're expanding our operations. The techniques we've perfected in Pennsylvania can be applied anywhere in America. We're planning to establish eternal life insurance offices in California, Texas, and the Dakota Territory. Within 10 years, we expect to be processing more than 1,000 death claims annually. The scope of their ambition was breathtaking in its evil. They weren't just running a criminal enterprise, they were planning to industrialize murder on a national scale. You're insane, Henley said. You can't possibly believe you can continue this without being detected. The statistical patterns alone will be managed by experts we've recruited from the finest universities. Isaiah interrupted. We've learned from our mistakes, Mr. Henley. Future operations will include sophisticated mathematical modeling to ensure that our mortality rates remain within acceptable parameters. We're not amateur criminals stumbling through trial and error. We're professionals implementing proven methodologies. Henley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. The Blackstone brothers weren't just killers, they were systematic, intelligent killers who had learned to perfect their methods over decades of practice. If they succeeded in expanding their operations nationally, they could potentially murder tens of thousands of Americans while maintaining the facade of legitimate business. But first, Mordecai continued, we need to address the immediate problems created by your investigation. Dr. Webb's testimony, your evidence files, and your personal knowledge of our operations. Marcus Kowalski and his associates had moved to block the warehouse exits while the brothers were talking. Henley was trapped, but he wasn't helpless. My evidence has already been delivered to federal prosecutors. Henley lied smoothly. Killing me won't stop the investigation. Actually, it will, Jebediah said with his politician's confidence. We've been monitoring your activities for weeks, Mr. Henley. We know exactly what evidence you've gathered and where you've stored it. Your hotel room was searched last night while you were sleeping, quite soundly, thanks to the laudanum our associate added to your dinner. Your evidence files have been confiscated, and any correspondence you may have sent to federal authorities has been intercepted by our contacts in the Postal Service." Henley's heart sank. If they had destroyed his evidence and intercepted his communications, Dr. Webb would testify without warning about the danger he faced, and the Blackstone operation would continue unimpeded. But Thomas Henley had not survived 15 years of dangerous investigations by relying on a single plan. While the Blackstone brothers had been searching his hotel room and intercepting his mail, Henley had been implementing a backup strategy that they couldn't have anticipated. "You may have found my evidence files," Henley said, "but you didn't find everything." Mordecai's confident expression flickered slightly. "What do you mean?" Henley reached slowly into his satchel, withdrawing not his concealed weapon, but a small leather journal. "This contains detailed records of every conversation I've had with your organization, including everything you've told me about your operations, your methods, and your plans for expansion. It also contains the names and locations of every corrupted official in your network, every professional killer you employ, and every planned operation you've discussed." Isaiah's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. We searched everything." "You searched everything I wanted you to find," Henley replied. "But you didn't search the things I mailed to myself under false names at post office boxes in 6 different cities. This journal is just one copy. There are 5 others, along with photographs of your operational maps and copies of your correspondence with agents and killers." The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of wind rattling the windows. The Blackstone brothers were realizing that their perfect criminal organization had been completely compromised by a single persistent investigator. "Even if you kill me here," Henley continued, "those packages will be collected according to a predetermined schedule. By Christmas, every federal prosecutor and newspaper editor on the East Coast will have complete documentation of your crimes." Mordecai was the first to recover from the shock. "You're bluffing. No investigator would risk exposing evidence to theft or loss by mailing it to random locations." "You're right," Henley agreed. "No normal investigator would take that risk. But I'm not investigating normal criminals. I'm investigating murderers who have killed thousands of people and corrupted officials at every level of government. Against an enemy like that, extraordinary measures are justified." The truth was that Henley had indeed mailed evidence packages to secure locations. But he had also taken one additional precaution that the Blackstone brothers couldn't have discovered. He had arranged for Margaret, his wife, to travel to Washington, D.C. under an assumed name, carrying the most crucial evidence directly to Assistant Attorney General Morrison. If Henley failed to return to New York by November 15th, Margaret had instructions to deliver the evidence and request immediate federal intervention. The telegram about her being in New York had been a bluff designed to discover whether the Blackstone brothers were monitoring his personal communications. "So here's what's going to happen," Henley said, his voice steady despite the mortal danger he faced. "You're going to let me walk out of this warehouse, and you're going to cease all operations immediately. Dr. Webb will give his testimony without interference, and you'll surrender yourselves to federal authorities for prosecution." Mordecai's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Mr. Henley, you seem to misunderstand your situation. Even if you've hidden evidence as you claim, you won't be alive to see it delivered. Dead men can't testify about what they've discovered, but living men can," Henley replied. "And I'm not the only person who knows about your crimes." That statement was partially true and partially bluff. Dr. Webb had indeed reached similar conclusions about the Blackstone operations, though he lacked Henley's comprehensive evidence. More importantly, Assistant Attorney General Morrison was already aware of the investigation and would certainly act if Henley disappeared under suspicious circumstances. But Henley's main protection was something the Blackstone brothers couldn't have anticipated. The warehouse meeting was being observed by federal agents who had followed Henley from his hotel. Morrison had been sufficiently concerned about Henley's safety to assign a small team of investigators to monitor the final phase of his infiltration. They were positioned outside the warehouse with instructions to intervene if Henley's life appeared to be in immediate danger. The sound of footsteps on the warehouse roof indicated that intervention was about to begin. The footsteps above were followed by the crash of breaking glass as federal agents rappelled through the skylights, landing in the warehouse with military precision. 3 armed men in dark coats surrounded the Blackstone brothers, while 2 more secured the exits, trapping Marcus Kowalski and his associates before they could escape. "Federal agents," shouted the lead investigator, a tall man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of a veteran soldier. "Nobody move." The Blackstone brothers' faces reflected different responses to this sudden reversal of fortune. Mordecai maintained his commanding presence even with a federal rifle pointed at his chest, his steel-gray eyes calculating odds and possibilities. Isaiah appeared stunned, as if his mathematical mind couldn't process how his carefully planned operation had been compromised so completely. Jebediah, ever the politician, immediately raised his hands and began speaking in the smooth, conciliatory tone he used with hostile voters. "Gentlemen, there seems to be some misunderstanding here. We're respected businessmen conducting a routine meeting with Mr. Henderson about insurance matters. Whatever you think you've witnessed, we've witnessed enough," the lead agent interrupted. "Agent Daniel Foster, U.S. Treasury Department. Thomas Henley, are you injured?" "I'm fine, Agent Foster," Henley replied, though his hands were shaking slightly from the tension of the past hour. "But you'll want to secure the evidence in this warehouse before anyone has a chance to destroy it." Foster nodded to his men, who immediately began collecting the operational maps, filing cabinets, and planning documents that filled the warehouse. The scope of evidence was staggering, detailed records of 37 years of systematic murder, corruption, and fraud that would require months to analyze completely. As federal agents placed the Blackstone brothers in shackles, Mordecai finally spoke directly to Henley. "You think you've won something here, Mr. Henley, but you have no idea what you've unleashed. Our organization extends far beyond these 3 men and this single warehouse. We have associates in a dozen states, contacts in federal offices, and resources you can't imagine." "Then I guess we'll have plenty of work to do," Foster replied grimly. Starting with the list of corrupted officials Mr. Henley discovered during his investigation. The arrests were only the beginning of the largest criminal investigation in American history to that point. Over the following 18 months, federal agents would arrest more than 200 people connected to the Blackstone conspiracy, including sheriffs, coroners, judges, mine owners, railroad executives, and dozens of professional killers and saboteurs. The trials, which began in Philadelphia in March 1877, revealed the full scope of the Blackstone empire to a horrified American public. Newspaper coverage of the proceedings was extensive and graphic, with reporters struggling to convey the sheer scale of the crimes to readers who could barely comprehend such systematic evil. The evidence presented during the trials included detailed documentation of 63 mass casualty events orchestrated by the Blackstone organization between 1859 and 1876. These disasters had claimed the lives of 2,147 people, including 1,123 primary policyholders and 924 family members who had been eliminated to prevent witnesses or complications. The financial scope was equally staggering. The Blackstone brothers had collected more than $4.2 million in fraudulent insurance claims while paying only $890,000 in bribes, equipment, and operational expenses. Their net profit from 17 years of systematic murder exceeded $3.3 million, an astronomical sum equivalent to more than $80 million in today's currency. Perhaps most chilling were the expansion plans discovered in Isaiah's personal files. The brothers had been preparing to establish operations in California, Texas, Colorado, and the Dakota Territory, with projected annual revenues of more than $10 million by 1885. If their plans had succeeded, they might have murdered tens of thousands of Americans while building one of the largest fortunes in the nation. Mordecai Blackstone was convicted on 47 counts of murder and sentenced to death. He was executed by hanging in Philadelphia on September 12, 1878, maintaining his innocence to the end and claiming he was a victim of government persecution designed to suppress business innovation. Isaiah Blackstone received a similar sentence, but died in prison before his execution date, apparently from a heart attack brought on by the stress of his incarceration. Some suspected suicide, though no evidence was ever found to support that theory. Jebediah Blackstone, whose political connections and cooperation with prosecutors earned him a reduced sentence, was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in Eastern State Penitentiary in 1894, having spent his final years writing detailed confessions that provided investigators with additional evidence about the organization's methods and scope. The corrupted officials connected to the Blackstone conspiracy faced varying fates. Sheriff Marcus Dougherty was convicted of accepting bribes and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Dr. James Morrison, who had falsified coroner reports, was stripped of his medical license and sentenced to 15 years. Several judges and federal officials were impeached and removed from office. The professional killers and saboteurs proved more difficult to prosecute, as many had fled to Canada or Mexico when news of the arrests became public. Marcus the engineer Kowalski was captured in Toronto and extradited to face trial for the Morgantown mine disaster. He was executed in West Virginia in 1879. Patrick the Torch McGillicuddy was never found, though reports placed him in various locations from California to South America. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Johnstown physician whose scheduled testimony had precipitated the final confrontation, played a crucial role in the prosecutions. His independent research provided corroborating evidence for many of Henley's discoveries and helped establish the timeline of Blackstone crimes in western Pennsylvania. The Eternal Life Insurance Company was dissolved by federal order, with its remaining assets used to provide compensation to the families of verified victims. The process of identifying and compensating all the victims took more than 5 years and required the creation of a special federal commission dedicated to unraveling the complex web of crimes. Thomas Henley was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Rutherford B. Hayes in recognition of his courage and persistence in exposing the conspiracy. He continued his career as an insurance investigator, but never again encountered a case that approached the scope and horror of the Blackstone murders. In his later writings, Henley reflected on the broader implications of the case. The Blackstone conspiracy had succeeded for so long, not because of superior criminal intelligence, but because of systematic corruption that pervaded American institutions at every level. Local officials had been bought, state authorities had been intimidated, and federal oversight had been minimal. The case led to significant reforms in insurance regulation, criminal investigation procedures, and interstate law enforcement cooperation. The creation of standardized mortality statistics and improved communication between state and federal authorities made it much more difficult for similar conspiracies to operate undetected. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Blackstone case was one that Americans have had to relearn repeatedly throughout their history: the danger of assuming that respectability and success are synonymous with honesty and morality. The Blackstone brothers had been pillars of their community, devout churchgoers, successful businessmen, and trusted public servants. Their crimes had been hidden not just by corruption and intimidation, but by the natural human tendency to assume that people who appear prosperous and respectable must be fundamentally decent. For 37 years, the good people of Mill Creek Township and dozens of other communities had trusted the Blackstone family with their most precious possessions: their lives, their family's security, and their faith in American institutions. That trust had been repaid with systematic murder on a scale that wouldn't be equaled in American criminal history until the organized crime syndicates of the early 20th century. The Blackstone family graves in Mill Creek Township Cemetery remain unmarked to this day. though local residents still speak in hushed tones about the events of 1876. The Eternal Life Insurance Company, building on Main Street, has housed various businesses over the decades, but none have lasted more than a few years. Some say the building is cursed. Others simply note that it's difficult to attract customers to a location associated with such horror. The warehouse where the final confrontation took place was demolished in 1881, and the site is now occupied by a small park with a memorial to the victims of the Blackstone conspiracy. The memorial lists the names of 2,247 confirmed victims, though historians believe the actual number may have been significantly higher. This mystery shows us that the greatest evils often wear the most respectable faces, and that the price of safety is constant vigilance against those who would exploit our trust for their own murderous gain. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about the Blackstone conspiracy? Or do you think some secrets went to the grave with the brothers? Leave your comment below and share your theories. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves uncovering the hidden horrors of America's past. These stories need to be told, and together we can ensure that the victims of history's greatest crimes are never forgotten. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark chapter that powerful people tried to erase from the historical record.